On this edition of the program, what have we learned from Liberation Week? A review of Revenge, the best book about Donald Trump's 2024 campaign, and an interview with the author. Alex Isenstadt joins the show. That's all coming up, but let's go ahead and get into this Liberation Day stuff before we even begin. The Liberation Day tariffs are paused for now. Deals with the rest of the world are upcoming, possibly. And we are in a for real trade war with China for sure. The stock market was down, then it was up, and then today it's slagged down again. But since we've seen this particular phase of the process play out, it is important to take a look at the only person that anybody can talk about, and that is, of course, Donald Trump. Democrats are obviously trying to strike while the iron's hot. They believe that they have a winner of a campaign issue on their hands. And if the economy craters, indeed they do, they will have a very salient campaign promise. And Donald Trump's numbers on the economy are not good. He's underwater by double digits, at least in some of the surveys that I've seen on the economy and inflation. That's very important because in his first term, that was his superpower. But as the Democrats look for a strong message that they can carry into the midterms and then eventually into 2028, they seem to have settled on something. The chaos president. And that's something that I want to visit because the theory of mind for Donald Trump is something that people talk a lot about. People get very invested into believing that they know how that man thinks. And it's across the entire spectrum. This entire process of Liberation Day was either a 4D chess move that Donald Trump used to perfection before putting in the tariffs that he wanted to do anyway and isolating China against the world. Or, on the other hand, he is a toddler with a machete and he is destroying the world economy, and it's only Congress that can take that weapon out of his hands. And people say that stuff with crazy assurity. They believe that they know how that guy thinks, which is very funny to me because they're wrong. Only I know exactly how Donald Trump thinks, and my theory of mind is totally correct, and I would like to share it with you now. I agree with the emerging branding of the Democratic Party that Donald Trump is a chaos president, but maybe not in the way that I think they hope the American people will brand him as one. Here's what I believe. I believe that Donald Trump is very comfortable in chaos because chaos is something that, if you can wait out, brings you two things that Donald Trump might love more than anything else in life: deals and attention. Did the Liberation Day tariffs, as they were initially announced a week and change ago, make a lick of sense? No. Were they done haphazardly? Almost assuredly. Did Donald Trump care? Absolutely not. Because people who are comfortable in chaos aren't people who are detail-oriented. And that makes detail-oriented people who largely live their lives so they can avoid chaos absolutely crazy. Trump believes he has an inherent advantage because as things are going crazy around him, he will have the ability to pick the off-ramp that he wants while everybody else is desperate just to make it stop. And part of that explains why we got mixed messages. Some members of the Trump administration, like Peter Navarro and Howard Lutnick, were talking about how tariffs are great and that we're going to bring a bunch of amazing jobs here to America, like screwing tiny little iPhone screws in. And then you had the Scott Bessents and the Elon Musks of the world that were saying, no, this is a golden age of global trade. And as I highlighted on Wednesday's show, it could only be one. And we found out which one it was on Wednesday. But the question then becomes, did Donald Trump blink? Or was this the art of the deal? And again, if you think of it from the perspective of he likes to have a lot of chaos around him and he's just going to pick one path forward, then I don't think it's particularly either. For example, for anybody who says that this was some gigantic, grand bargaining plan, I don't agree with them. This is our guest a little bit later in the show, Alex Isenstadt. We mostly talk about his book, but we wound up talking a little bit more about stuff that's happening right now. He's currently a senior political writer at Axios, but this is what he was hearing on Tuesday about what Trump's team was talking about with tariffs.
So you had different power factions that played off against one another. So you'd have the America First people led by Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro. They wanted tariffs, right? Let's talk about tariffs. They wanted tariffs. But then you also had people like Jared Kushner and Gary Cohn and these Goldman Sachs types who were like, whoa, we can't do that, right?
Yeah.
Now let's look at this White House. This White House is not marked by different power factions. It's not. You have people who are, for the most part, loyal to Susie Wiles, and it is a White House that's not focused on internal debate, but rather on facilitating what it is Trump wants. And what we know is that Trump has always wanted tariffs. He's always liked tariffs. He's always had a thing for tariffs. And so now you have a White House that has helped to facilitate his policy goal of implementing tariffs, which is something he's talked about for decades.
And to back that up, I heard from the Hill that the White House was informing allies on the Hill that the tariff situation was going to be maintained, that you were going to see maybe some deals with smaller countries, but the big boys, EU, Japan, certainly China, there was not going to be a deal to be had. They were going to live with higher tariffs. And part of the reason why is because even with those smaller countries, the thing that Trump wanted to negotiate was not a lower tariff rate. It was a commitment to buy American. And so for the smaller countries, it was, invest in American infrastructure in some level, like a plane or telecom stuff. But what is that going to be when it scales up to the EU or Japan or, dare we say, China? Well, that's a horse of a different color. So I don't buy the idea that this was something that Donald Trump knew from the very beginning was going to happen. Add on top of that bond yields were going in the wrong direction, and Trump has even admitted that that was part of the reason why he put in the pause. But at the same time, I don't necessarily believe that that means he had no sense of what was going on. I don't think he was Jar Jar Binksing his way through this. He caused a chaotic situation, surveyed his options, and then exited when he felt that it was the most appropriate. Now, is that a good way to be the president of the United States, the nominal head of the global economy? Depending on how much you believe in what he believes, you can salt a taste on that. The one thing I think I can say is if you were going to put a 10% across the board tariff on the rest of the world and have a conga line of delegations coming to the White House so they could negotiate whatever you wanted to negotiate, and you would mostly be focusing your big trade war energy on somebody that most Americans believe probably does deserve some kind of rebuke, and that is China, then he's not put himself in a terrible position. Which brings us to the chaos candidate. If we are to take my theory of mind for Donald Trump seriously and say that that is the kind of thing that he likes to do, you would think that the Democrats labeling him that would probably be the thing that voters would want to hear, and that you would begin to peel off support from independents that Democrats need to vote for them, especially in the midterms. And that may very well be right. In fact, if the economy does go into a recession, like some people are suspecting, then Donald Trump will own it. This will be an executive order recession, which is probably the most directly, you could blame a president for bringing something like that on. But if it doesn't, well, we're in a trickier situation. Because the one thing that Trump did do, no matter how loud, no matter how clumsy, no matter how chaotic, is something. The thing that voters seem to always want a politician to do. Do something. And I have worries for the Democratic coalition because the Republican coalition is changing. But you also have to wonder whether or not working class Americans are going to make the Democratic coalition to be harder and harder to cobble together. And while certainly anybody with a 401k or money in the market does not like seeing chart go down, how much does it matter to working class Americans? How much does it matter to labor unions? How much does it matter to the kind of demographics that the Democratic Party used to count on to go vote for them, and in increasing numbers voted for Trump in 2024. I guess what I'm trying to say is that what we saw this week was a plan in action. And regardless of what you thought of it, it is something that Trump talked about on the campaign trail and then came to fruition. So if it's not economic disaster, does Trump get credit for it by those voters? Only time will tell.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for, what day is it? Oh, April 11th, 2025. Your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you. Oh boy, man, I got walloped by daycare germs. Oh, geez Louise, just hit me out of nowhere. But we sally forth for you, the PX3 listener and viewer. And thankfully, the economic craziness that happened over the last 7 days has now taken a pause, which means we can focus on something that I'm very excited to do, and that is to bring you yet another installation of our 2024 campaign book club. We're going to talk to Alex Isenstadt, the author of the book, which is Revenge, all about Donald Trump's 2024 campaign. And my top line is this. I was very excited to get into it and read a sober-minded look into what I thought was, from the outside, a well-run but very curious campaign. Trump world in the previous two electoral cycles was anything but stable or competent. They were all over the map, often firing its leadership and having a candidate that was pretty well uncontrollable. And there's no greater sense that Donald Trump himself is controllable, but he certainly surrounds himself in 2024 with a team that fits him a lot better. As much as I enjoyed Fight, which we reviewed last week, that's a book, like most of Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes's work, that is far better sourced on the Democratic side. They have incredible sourcing on the Democratic side, and they have good sourcing on the Republican side, but it's not as deep as this book goes. In fact, to my knowledge, aside from a few names of like getting into the Corey Lewandowski, Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita feud, the one big tidbit that they had in Fight that isn't in this book is that Susie Wiles apparently had a premonition that Donald Trump was going to get shot and killed earlier in the campaign when the indictments were going down in New York. But if you, like me, were wondering why there was a material change in the competency of this campaign, this is the book for you. dare I say it, if you like to follow this kind of stuff like I do, I think it's a must read because it gives you a very good X-rayed look into this coterie of operatives that surrounded Donald Trump in 2024. And much like the roster of operatives for the Bush administration or the Reagan administration, you're probably going to see these same names pop up a lot over the next few years. As long as the MAGA coalition exists, you will hear from the people that are in this book. And as we're going to talk to Alex a little bit later, Trump himself evolves during this campaign, specifically during two big watershed moments: when he realizes that he could go to jail and when he nearly dies. But really, you know what we're here for. We on this show believe these books are essentially the report cards of the campaigns because they form the narratives and reputations of the people that ran them. And so here are my winners and losers from Revenge. Winner, Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita. They are looked at as competent operatives in the same way that they were with Fight. You get even more of the humanity of LaCivita specifically. He is somebody that very much has a tough exterior, and that comes across, but you can understand a little bit more. You get inside the head of, he was a guy he's a dad. His daughter was on the campaign. So you get a little bit more of the humanity there. Susie Wiles still remains a bit of an elusive figure to cover, meaning I don't think that she talks to anybody. Or she talks to people and is very guarded, because you don't get as much humanity with Susie Wiles. But still, they are looked at as the nucleus of this campaign. They do everything well. They are able to weather storms. Whenever there is a moment that there's a back and forth on what they should do on something, they're usually on the right side of history. And so the both of them, unsurprisingly, winners in this book. But here was another winner that I thought was really interesting. J.D. Vance, and specifically his staff. Some of the most interesting parts of the book were the Veep chase. And you start to get a sense of who was really involved, Donald Trump's selection process. And J.D. Vance and his team not only play the inside game really, really well with that, activating the right surrogates at the right time to make sure that they can get over the hump and eventually get that nomination. But also, once he's on the ticket, they were very proactive about creating a role for himself. Isenstadt talks a little bit more about this later, but the idea of MAGA policy wonk who is unafraid to talk to anybody about it, that's a creation of J.D. Vance and his staff. And it kind of shows you the difference, especially between this campaign that you see in Revenge and the total disorganization of the Kamala campaign and the Biden campaign that you read in Fight, where with the Trump side, they wound up, and this is, I think, just an example of all things sort of clicking. They created an environment where you had people that wanted to figure out how they could be a part of the rodeo. And if you have good guidance at the top, that really works out for you. And that's what J.D. Vance did. J.D. Vance was like, how can I be a value add for this ticket? He figured it out. So let's go to the losers. The number one loser is Corey Lewandowski. And you can always tell with books like this when there is a tonnage of crap talk that people want to say about one person, because you wind up just getting a lot of details about stuff. And I don't think anybody gets as much sewage dumped on him as Corey Lewandowski. He's a philanderer. He's a hothead. He's selfish. He desperately wants to put himself at the center of a winning campaign at the expense of the people that created the ability for it to be a winning campaign. It's pretty harsh. And I don't really know that there's any argument to say that he doesn't deserve it, at least in the eyes of the people that spoke to Alex for this book. And the other loser is Natalie Harp. We're going to talk a little bit more about her in the interview, but Natalie Harp, known as the human printer, is a personal aide for Donald Trump and gets a lot of different colorful anecdotes about her sycophancy to Trump, about how out of pocket she is. And there's even comical anecdotes about her being so distracted trying to be in service to Donald Trump that she crashes her car and so much more. So I don't know if really either of those two are going to be affected in their professional careers, because both of them at this point essentially define their worth by their proximity to Trump. And Trump, I think, still likes to have them in the orbit because they say a lot of nice things about him. Natalie Harp is in the White House right now. Corey Lewandowski, I assume, is adjacent to the White House since his possible girlfriend, Kristi Noem, is the DHS secretary. But yeah, there were a lot of people that had some negative things to say about those two. Revenge by Alex Isenstadt. Don't take my word for it. Read it yourself. We got the update, and then we talk to Alex. This is your update, brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That's where you get 2 bonus episodes each and every week. Hey, if you were a subscriber, you got my first reaction to the Trump pause. Oh, good Lord. Good Lord. I can't even with this administration. It's just so ridiculous. The House narrowly approved a budget framework central to President Trump's agenda, passing with a 216 to 214 vote. The resolution enables Republicans to advance significant tax cuts, increase military and border security spending, and substantial revisions to energy, health, and social safety net programs. The passage followed intense negotiations, notably involving a joint appearance by House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune, who pledged to find at least $1.5 trillion in spending cuts to gain conservative support. Democrats opposed the plan, criticizing it for potential deep cuts to programs like Medicare. So this is essentially the last procedural hurdle that needed to happen before the Senate and the House actually start putting this bill together, which is going to be an absolute knife fight. The big question here was holdouts on the House side, because their version of the bill had $1.5 trillion in cuts. The Senate side had $4 billion. You know, even a Florida public school graduate like myself knows that $4 billion is pretty far away from $1.5 trillion. But that is what it is. Now we begin the hard part. So Mike Johnson, this one was a little bit tougher. They actually had to pull the vote last night, came back today and voted on it, but they got it through. I still think that there's going to be some fights. Arms are going to have to be twisted off the body to vote for the big, beautiful bill. Although the hope is from both the Senate and the House is that the closer this gets, the more nobody is going to be on the other end of saying that they didn't provide tax relief to the American public. And that's really the big engine in all this, is that they want to make the tax cuts permanent, semi-permanent. There's a question of exactly how much you can do with that. The parliamentarian, aka the bird bath of the Senate, that's still going to have to go on, where they're going to determine what can be in there, what can't be in there. I heard that part of the fight is going to be from the House side, that you can put in some stuff knowing that it's going to get taken out by the parliamentarian, but you at least want to try to put it in there. And then there's a fight of pre-negotiation from House leadership. So there's a lot going on. But still, the big, beautiful bill is ongoing. Donald Trump has stripped security clearances from Chris Krebs and Miles Taylor, both former appointees who criticized him, and ordered federal investigations into their tenures. The move is part of a broader campaign of retribution against perceived enemies using executive powers in unprecedented ways. Krebs, who was fired after rejecting the 2020 election fraud claims, was labeled a bad faith actor, and his current employer, Sentinel One, faces clearance suspensions. Taylor, meanwhile, who wrote an anonymous 2018 op-ed criticizing Trump, was branded a traitor. Critics said Trump's actions breached norms separating the White House and the Justice Department, politicizing law enforcement to punish dissent. Taylor, if you might remember, wrote the Anonymous book. He was the one that wrote the column that had Lodestar in it, and some people thought he was Mike Pence. There's a particularly funny clip of him on CNN where he is asked whether or not he is anonymous, and he says, the only time I wear masks is during Halloween and pandemics. Krebs is somebody that was most notable for saying that the 2020 election was the most secure election in history. Obviously, that pissed Donald Trump off. These are kind of bonkers executive orders. Let's be clear, right? It's one thing to punish your enemies. Every president punishes his enemies. It is not like Democratic presidents or Republican presidents from a more establishment bent in the past didn't wreak havoc on those that they thought crossed them. To do it in an executive order is odd. I don't remember seeing that. And finally, this is something from earlier in the week that we did not get to. Former New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu has decided not to run for Senate in 2026. This is, I think our frequent guest, Kirk Beto, put it up on Twitter. The Fell For It Again award. The Republican Senatorial Committee, they fall for it every time. Whenever there's a seat that's up, they say, Chris, you're the only Republican that can win this seat. You're a popular governor. People like you. You've carved your own lane. You're great on television. You can raise a bunch of money. Go ahead and run. And he's like, I'm going to run. And they're like, yeah, you should run. And he's like, I think I'm going to run. And they're like, yeah. It was not but 48 hours before he made this announcement that Donald Trump gave him his full endorsement. He said, I think he's going to run. I think he's going to win. Then Sununu says, not so much. I wonder whether or not this is because of Liberation Day. Would not shock me. So the big question here now is if conventional wisdom behind the scenes from the Sununus of the world is that he doesn't want to run because he believes this is going to be a D+4 +5 environment. So that means that the popular vote will be Democratic plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. Does that affect the Brian Kemps of the world? Because Brian Kemp in Georgia, that's if Kemp doesn't run, I think it is Ossoff's race to lose. I think he is a prohibitive favorite. I would have Kemp over Ossoff in a head-to-head. I think it'll be close, but I would have Kemp ahead of him. Is this a little bit of I don't know, if the economy's not going to be good. If the economy was good, maybe I'd do it. But if the economy's not good, then maybe I don't. If Brian Kemp wobbles, that is not a good sign for the Republicans in the Senate. That's your update. TakePoliticsSeriously.com, where you need to go. Support us on Substack. 2 bonus episodes each and every week. And now, Alex Isenstadt. I would like to welcome to the program Alex Isenstadt. He is the author of Revenge, the inside story of Trump's return to power. Welcome to the program, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
So I very much enjoyed your book. Let's
Thank
get that out of the way up top. I will have done my book review at the beginning, and I'm happy to have you on now.
Thank you.
To me, one of the most undercovered elements of the last 8 years is the Trump movement through their own words. And I think in the previous two terms or two cycles, that was hard because there were so many voices and none of them were on the same page. And in this cycle, and this is what you capture really well, there wasn't as much reporting from my point of view while it was happening because they were actually efficient and they were on the same page. And this is the first book that I've read that has the depth that you have to actually get inside and understand the inner workings beyond a surface level. Why do you think that your work has kind of stood out compared to everybody else, every other talented journalist that's been trying to cover the biggest story on the planet?
Well, I don't know that I would say that. I mean, I have a lot of respect for a lot of my colleagues. I think a lot of people have done good work. But thank you for your kind words. I appreciate that. What sort of taking you inside how I reported this book? I would say that I started in February of 2023. So this was a few months after Trump launched his campaign. And what I did was I went to people in and around Trump world, people close to him, donors, allies, staffers, senior advisors, lower level advisors, members of Congress, pretty much as many people as you could think of. And I said to them, look, I want to write a behind the scenes look at Trump's comeback campaign. It's going to be a historic campaign. It's going to be dramatic. I think everyone knew that it was going to be historic and dramatic. I don't think we all knew how historic and dramatic it would end up being.
No.
But what I found was that a lot of people wanted to help. Not everyone wanted to help, but a lot of people did. And they wanted to help just retell history and try to give readers a flavor of what it was like behind the scenes. And my goal was to make people feel like they're there, like they're a fly on the wall. And I did my best to not write this book as an anti-Trump book or as a pro-Trump book, but rather as just letting people, just more from an objective standpoint and letting people draw their own conclusions.
And I do think that the subject matter this time gives you more of an ability to do it because the people that are talking are generally talking about kind of campaign decisions and the personalities that go on around it compared to some of the previous things where there's real blood feuds where everybody's screaming and yelling about somebody who ruined something, or there's a lot of people that got fired and that brings along bad feelings. This was, by comparison, fairly placid. Let me ask you a general question, because this is something that I got after we interviewed Amy Parnes and Jonathan Allen for Fight. Because you are also a working reporter for Politico, what is the line when you're covering this stuff that you are saying, okay, this is for the book, or this breaks the news value barrier that I got to get this out for my day job here at Politico?
Yeah. So when I was talking with sources, what I would always say is, can I use this for Politico? That was my first. I was at Politico at the time. Now I'm at Axios.
Yeah.
And what I would always say is, can I use this for the book? And in a lot of cases, can I use this for reporting, day-to-day reporting for Politico? And in some cases, sources said yes. But in a lot of cases, what they said is, look, this is too sensitive. This can only come out in a book after the campaign is said and done.
Yeah.
And, I was always very clear in communicating with sources about those ground rules, being on the same page with them, so to speak, and making sure that, my first priority was always my day job. It still is. I'm not working on a book at the moment, but there were cases in which there were interviews in which it was clear that people only wanted things for the book and so on and so forth.
And I think my audience very much knows. I believe these books are really important. I believe that even as we are going through a very particular newsworthy cycle for the world of politics right now, I'm still talking about these 2024, or I am talking about these 2024 books that are out here, because I do think that as a historical document, they matter. And one of the things that you really capture here in this book is this reformed version of the Trump world that had now been battered and bruised through 2020. You pick it up as he is beginning to, which is almost immediately, beginning to talk to everybody about how he is going to come back. From your conversations, what was the biggest difference with Trump specifically between the previous 2 runs and his time in the White House versus how he was on the campaign trail this time?
Yeah. So, and this is actually a really important point in the book, but he was, and this is very surprising, actually, something that surprised me in the context of my reporting, but he's in some ways a very different person. He decided that he did not like the chaos at the staff level during his first campaign, his White House, and his second campaign. He was done with that. Now, he's okay with chaos that he creates, but infighting at the staff level, drama at the staff level, leaking at the staff level, he was done with that. And so he brought aboard Susie Wiles, who was his 2024 campaign manager, now his White House chief of staff. And she's someone who imposed a lot of discipline. Susie Wiles is a longtime Republican operative. She doesn't have tolerance for staff drama. She doesn't have tolerance for leaking. She doesn't want infighting. And so she really took his political operation after January 6th, which really didn't exist anymore. And she took it, she built it from the ground up. And she's now taken those loyal people who are with her from the campaign. She has now brought them over with her to Washington inside the White House. And it is a completely different operation in the White House. And one of the reasons why this book is important, I think, is because what happened in the campaign is now what's happening in the White House. You have a very different White House. The first White House was marked by different power factions, right? Kellyanne Conway was one power faction. Steve Bannon was certainly one power faction. You had the America First side of things. Then you had the Jared Kushner, Gary Cohn, Dina Powell faction, which was more kind of traditional, especially in the economic sense, Goldman Sachs. And so you had these different, and then you had the Reince Priebus kind of.
I was gonna say, that was Reince was the only one that I could think of that you hadn't listed.
So you had different power factions that played off against one another. So you'd have the America First people led by Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro. They wanted tariffs, right? Let's talk about tariffs. They wanted tariffs. But then you also had people like Jared Kushner and Gary Cohn and these Goldman Sachs types who are like, whoa, we can't do that, right?
Yeah.
Now let's look at this White House. This White House is not marked by different power factions. It's not. You have people who are, for the most part, loyal to Susie Wiles, and it is a White House that's not focused on internal debate, but rather on facilitating what it is Trump wants. And what we know is that Trump has always wanted tariffs. He's always liked tariffs. He's always had a thing for tariffs. And so now you have a White House that has helped to facilitate his policy goal of implementing tariffs, which is something he's talked about for decades.
Yeah, and that's and full disclosure here, because I do want this to be a document that lives for all time to capture this moment, because I think the book is that important. But we are at Tuesday, April 8th right now as we record it. So the one thing that I would say to that state of play is that Donald Trump has talked since the 80s about tariffs. Yep. He's also talked since the 80s about deals and how he makes the best ones. So that's where I think we are at a very curious, a splitting of the roads, where if there is an ideological divide in that brain trust, it is people who are like, hey, congratulations, you gave yourself leverage in a way that now you can make the best, a month-long ceremony, a conga line of every other head of state that's going to talk about how they're welcoming in American exports. Or you have the real true believers on tariffs that are saying, no, we're going to bring every offshore factory back to America, and it's going to make us stronger and better than ever.
Right. Yeah. I don't think there's a terrible amount of infighting in the White House about this. I think you've got people like Elon Musk who are out there saying he doesn't think this is a great idea. But I mean, Trump and Musk have disagreed on things before, and Trump has shown a willingness to keep Elon around, right?
Yeah.
And so this is a White House that's like, when I talk to them, they're very matter of fact, like, he's in for tariffs. He's serious about it. They're not going anywhere. We're behind him. This is what he campaigned on. So that's where we stand right now.
Well, let's go back to the book. One of the things I think, I'm very glad that you mentioned Susie Wiles. When Parnes and Allen were on talking about their book. I lamented the fact that they did not cover the primaries. You did me a great favor and gave me amazing stories about the Trump primary. I'm still waiting for a book that covers the DeSantis campaign, because that is something that I would definitely plunk down hard-earned money for, because it was, by my vantage point, an absolute disaster. And I would love to know people's very strong feelings about each other and why that went the way that it went. But everything does seem to flow out of Susie Wiles. And from Susie comes Chris LaCivita, and you have people that she thought was worth it from the previous two. But you also get the ring of people that, though that nucleus is trying to keep in check, maybe not away from the president, but there's one person they can't. Can you please tell the listeners about the human printer, who is an amazing character, not only in your book, but I'm sure in life itself?
Sure. So her name is Natalie Harp, and she is someone who came aboard Trump's orbit. She's a former conservative newscaster, came aboard Trump's orbit while he was out of the White House, and became known for her steadfast loyalty, but not loyalty in the way that a lot of people around Trump are, but we're talking about serious loyalty. Did not like the idea of him being out of her sights at all. And the reason she became known as a human printer is because she would have a portable printer with her at all times on the plane, on the golf course. She would attach it to a little vehicle that she would, a golf cart that she would ride around with Trump. She was there to print out whatever articles he wants at any given time, and would print out things from, conspiracy theory oriented websites, other things. She would put that paper in front of him. And as a lot of your listeners know, that information flow in Trump world, or in any White House really is incredibly important, right? If you're managing information flow, or if you're giving him papers, or if you're putting reporting or articles in front of him, that determines what he knows about and what he truth socials about. And so she shaped a lot of that. But she was so loyal to him, and that even Trump was struck by it. And at certain points, she became her loyalty, and became a point that what a lot of people on the campaign saw as going too far, to the point of obsessiveness.
Yeah, I believe the movie Basic Instinct is reference, or maybe Fatal Attraction. Fatal Attraction. One of those erotic horrors of the 80s or 90s. Yeah, it is. It's in a campaign that's kind of marked with this element of rigidity, that like there are points that work. Trump buys the polling. He believes he's in a strong position, and then he moves forward. That is the chaos. And certainly we see that down the road when Kamala becomes the nominee. But I want to ask you about two different points that you wrote about, because even if Donald Trump begins this as sick of the chaos of the previous two campaigns, it does feel that there are two other big inflection points where his mood changes. One is the flurry of indictments that comes during the primaries, and the other obviously is the first attempt on his life that puts him in the hospital. How does, based on your reporting, how does he change mentally with those two? Sure.
So I think that the first indictments in some ways helped Trump clarify his campaign, his message, the way he wanted to run his campaign, and ended up really helping him in the race. You'll remember that right after Trump announced his campaign in November of 2022, it was a really bad moment for him. And he was getting blamed by Republicans for the party's disappointing performance in that year's midterm elections. You then have a few weeks later, Trump has dinner with these two anti-Semites, Kanye West and Nick Fuentes. You then have this Truth Social that he has that comes out, which he challenges the Constitution. You then have him launching this NFT baseball card line. And so one of the things I convey in the book is that Trump's top tier of advisors were sitting around them at that point in early 2023 and saying, is this guy actually serious about running for president? And it was something people were really thinking about, whether it was a stunt, whether he just wasn't interested in seriously campaigning. And so then a couple things happen. One is he goes to Ohio, where there's the site of this train derailment, and it helps form this nucleus of his campaign, this idea that he can be a vessel for people's frustrations towards the federal government, right? And this is one of the themes that runs throughout my book. And then something else happens that really hardens that theme. And that is the indictments. First in the hush money trial, and then there are three others, right? Two of which surrounds January 6th, the attempts to overturn the election. Another of which involves him taking classified documents after he left the White House.
Yeah.
These indictments, Trump was able to use to establish the central thrust of his candidacy, which is that he is a vessel for people's frustrations. He's a vessel for the working class. He's the vessel for anyone who feels like the federal government has disregarded them, shut them out, not cared for them. He is a vessel for all these people and all their frustrations, not just working class people, but minorities, young men who feel down and out, right? And so the trial helps him in a way, and it's stunning, but to think that you could be indicted and have that help you rather than hurt you, that's something we could have never foreseen 2 years ago.
This is something that I don't remember reading in the book, but I'm curious if you had a sense of that of those four cases, by far the most politically advantageous to come first was the one that did, the New York indictment, mostly because even people that desperately would love to see Donald Trump in jail can't describe why he would go to jail in less than 2 sentences because it's pretty confusing. And if you scratch the surface on that, it seems, there are only 34 indictments because they charge stacked, and there's a lot of things in there that don't really pass the sniff test. That's not the same with the Mar-a-Lago docks case. That's not the same with the federal Jan 6 case, and leaving Fani Willis out of it. The Georgia January 6 case, at least by polling, captured America's attention more and was looked at as more of an active threat. Did the Trump campaign believe that they were lucky that was the first one that hit?
100%. And it goes to this, one of the central themes that he was trying to express during the campaign, which is that he was a victim of a witch hunt, of a government-led witch hunt. And, look, this was taken not only just by people in the campaign, but in legal circles. People didn't see this as the most serious, you're right, of the four indictments. And Trump was able to make the case that Alvin Bragg and prosecutors in New York were trying to destroy him. And so it helped. This was not seen as the most serious of the four cases by any stretch of the imagination.
And then they do get a little help. The Fani Willis fiasco is something that is probably still ongoing. And also for anybody else who's listening, I'd also take a book on that. I'd also really like to know more about everything that happened with that scenario as it fell apart like a slow motion train wreck. But then we get to Butler and the attempt on his life. Obviously, this is a huge part of any book, any story of the 2024 election on some level hinges upon this day. From my money, you get the most detail of what happens immediately afterward, where he goes, who he's talking to. How does he change from that moment?
Yeah, so this chapter, in constructing it, we all know what happened on stage that day. Those horrible images that we all saw play on repeat, right? But my goal was to take there's sort of this black hole, which is what happens when he leaves the stage and goes into the hospital. And so my goal was to take readers inside the hospital and to convey a sense of the chaos, the sense that people who were close to him, including Susie Wiles, didn't know if he was going to live or die. The fact that people like Stephen Chung and others in the communications department of the campaign were getting outreach from reporters who were going to report that Trump had died. There was a sheer sense of chaos. And to also paint the picture of what Trump was like, I mean, he had no shoes on when he was in the hospital. He was in, work socks.
Yeah, you got that. He was looking for his shoes on stage. He never finds his shoes. He eventually gets them delivered to them, but he didn't have his shoes in the hospital.
Right. And, his jacket's off and his shirt was off because he was down to his undershirt in the hospital because he was so bloodied.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I try to convey in the book was Trump was more emotionally, and this is understandable that he felt this way, very understandable. He was more emotionally jolted by this shooting than he let on publicly, right? We remember what happened a few days later when he went to the convention and you saw him being, greeted like a hero. He walks in, it's almost like Caesar. And but he was more emotionally jolted than he let on. And he had a call with a former aide the next day after the shooting. And he says, look, if that bullet was a hair closer, my head would have exploded like a watermelon on live television. And what actually happens is after the shooting, we know that the following week, that's when Joe Biden gets out of the race. Kamala Harris gets in. And for the first time, it really looks like Trump has kind of lost control of his campaign. He goes through this bumpy 1 month stretch, right, where he has this really rocky performance at the National Association of Black Journalists. He goes to Georgia and he attacks Brian Kemp. He does a number of things that his campaign advisors really are concerned about, and they feel like he's lost traction against Kamala Harris. And part of what some people are thinking is that the shooting has really jolted him in a way that has made it hard for him to campaign. And understandably so. I want to stress that point. Understandably so.
One of the things that I was saying on this show contemporaneously to that is something that you, I believe, get a quote from either a donor or somebody close to Trump, which is that I don't think a man in his 70s, traditionally not the poster child for cognitive behavioral therapy,
right,
can get nearly shot in the head and not deal with post-traumatic stress syndrome. And especially when every word you say publicly and most of the words you say privately are underneath the microscope. And so you're going to reserve more of yourself to do it. There's no way that a human being, regardless of whatever you think about Donald Trump, a human being can go through that and not have some kind of mental fallout. And you put a voice to that. The second is that it also runs into this other part of Donald Trump's personality that usually in the past has cost his advisors their jobs, which is that in a rocky moment, Donald Trump likes to create controversy to get the attention back on him. And he does that in two ways that are incredibly self-destructive, as you just laid out. First, drawing racial lines between Kamala Harris's identity, and the second, picking a fight he absolutely did not need to pick with Brian Kemp up on stage. What is the mood of the campaign at that point? Obviously, you mentioned it early on, there's this sense of, is he serious when he's eating with Nick Fuentes and Kanye West? But in this moment, is it, let's hope he rights the ship? Is it, we need to take more active measures? What is the mood in the campaign?
Yeah, the mood in the campaign is like, look, like Trump is the driver of his own campaign, right? I mean, Chris LaCivita, and others throughout the campaign said, look, he's the boss. And he does, this is his campaign first and foremost. And so one of the things that you see happening is there is real concern within the campaign at that point. For the first, you have, Corey Lewandowski comes aboard on the campaign and launches this very aggressive behind the scenes effort to torpedo Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles and to take over the campaign. There was a tremendous amount of chaos in the Trump campaign in that 1 month period after Kamala Harris gets in and after Trump is shot. Tremendous chaos. And things could have very easily gone sideways. And that's one of the things I try to convey in a chapter that's about this 1 month period where Trump really kind of loses control. Eventually, things do get righted. The ship does get righted. But a lot of the time in that, Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles were fighting for their jobs to make sure that Corey Lewandowski didn't submarine them, which is something that we know has happened during the summer of past Trump campaigns, right?
Yeah.
Two previous Trump presidential campaigns both had huge shakeups during the summer before the general election. And so they were very much preoccupied with fighting for their jobs at that point.
And it is very, very well captured. The Lewandowski thing is fascinating because that was one of the few things that leaked out during the campaign itself that was about internal drama. Part of it was out of necessity because they had to put out a press release saying that Corey Lewandowski was part of the campaign, which confirmed, what reporters like you were hearing at the time of exactly how chaotic it was. But ultimately, it is Susie and Chris who wind up righting the ship. What is the decision from your point of view that has Trump make the play for stability as opposed to the play for let's blow it up and see what happens, which is what he's done in the past?
Yeah. So I think that Trump feels very loyal to Susie in part because, let me just say that here's what ended up happening. So Corey mounts this effort to try to take over the campaign. And then I have a scene in the book where Trump and Susie and Lewandowski are on the plane one day, and Trump says to the group, look, Chris and Susie are in charge. There will be no fighting. And I think this encapsulates a couple of different things. One, which I said earlier, which is that Trump he did not have the same kind of appetite for chaos among his staff that he did in the past. That was something of the past for him. Two, Trump feels very loyal to Susie. She was with him after January 6th. Post-January 6th was a time when Trump's own friends were not taking his phone calls. He was absolute pariah. Then Susie Wiles, an establishment Republican, very well respected, daughter of the late NFL announcer, Pat Summerall, comes aboard and builds his political operation from the rips it down to the studs and starts completely over. And he knows that she deserves his loyalty for that. And so that was an incredibly important moment in this campaign. And so I think one can't overstate Trump's loyalty to Susie Wiles. And then along those points, another person who's very important in Trump's orbit during his campaign and now during his White House is a guy by the name of Steve Witkoff, who is an important figure in this book as well. Steve Witkoff has known Trump dating back decades, both New York real estate guys. And after January 6th, Steve Witkoff, not only did he stay in Trump's corner, not only did he continue to play golf with Trump, but he never once asked Trump about his role on January 6th. Trump remembered that, kept Witkoff around, and now you have Steve Witkoff playing an incredibly important role in shaping American foreign policy, even though he doesn't have any real foreign policy experience to speak of. And so Wiles and Witkoff both illustrate how important loyalty is to Trump, especially after January 6th.
Well, and to your point with Witkoff, as you explained in your book, he does have experience in mediating gigantic egos because he brokered the sit down with Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump and Brian Kemp and Donald Trump. So wherever there's a huge ego situation to mend, he has found himself in the center of it. I have one last big topic that I want to talk to you about, and that is JD Vance. He is somebody that mostly gets a lot of praise for how he weathered the storm during the weird couch effing portion of the campaign.
Right.
When things were looking really, really good. But something that I noticed pretty early on, and this was when the Trump campaign kind of staunched the bleeding of the Brat Summer thing. And it was a move to put JD Vance on the road with the Kamala campaign to do open press conferences in front of there. And I thought that was a particularly bold stance, because at that time, JD Vance was looked at as, he was being discussed as the worst vice presidential pick of all time. He's absolute kryptonite. The more you put him on television, the more he's going to alienate female voters, which everybody believed was going to turn the election. So number one, you're saying have more of him. In fact, more hot mics. We want to give him more opportunities to talk off the cuff. But he wound up highlighting that he was talking and they weren't. He wound up having a lot more time on television that was being covered live. And I think it wound up preparing him for the moment that he has with Tim Walz. Talk a little bit about where JD fits into this campaign and why it worked.
So JD Vance, let's go back to a few weeks after he was picked. A number of statements that he makes come out, which are controversial, and he is getting enormous amount of scrutiny, bad headlines. Reporters are starting to sniff around on this idea that, of course, was not going to happen, that somehow Trump was going to dump him from the ticket. And it gets to the point where Trump tells his advisors, oh my God, I don't want to be a weight on this ticket. He was taken aback. I mean, let's remember, this is a guy who's very new to the political scene, right?
Yep.
I mean, he waged his first campaign in 2022. Now, all of a sudden, he's the vice presidential nominee for president of the United States. So he's saying, oh my God.
And people forget that primary was, he runs against Josh Mandel in Ohio, and that, he gets the Trump endorsement and he squeaks over the line, but that was not an easy primary for him.
It was not an easy primary. He had the Trump endorsement. He had Peter Thiel's money. Those both put him over the finish line, but it was not easy. You're 100% right. And what happens is that he and his campaign team come up with a plan, which is for him to become the policy attack dog and to really focus in on policy issues. And this is where you sort of see him hit his groove. And he goes on TV. He takes on the mainstream press. He goes after anchors who are interviewing him. He galvanizes conservatives behind him. And so that really is the message that he adopts, and it ends up working for him. He goes into this debate against Tim Walz, gets rave reviews for that. And so he really righted the ship from what was a disastrous start to something that was far stronger. And it was because he and his team identified where he could be the most helpful, which was taking on the role of policy attack dog.
So that does seem to be a common thread that you've had throughout this book. The people that wind up working best with Trump are people that are self-starters. They identify their own lanes, and then they are deferential. They see where Trump needs them. They fill it in, and then they cap their ambition at that level, and they're no further. And then don't steal money. That's the other thing that you're very clear. That's an absolute no-no in the campaign. Even Chris LaCivita gets a real rough meeting because Lewandowski says he's stealing money.
Yeah. And that's also when Trump first hires Susie Wiles back in early 2021, what he tells her is like, look, I don't know if people are stealing money from me. And he's very worried that his previous campaign team was stealing money. And so that's something that he's always been fixated on, which is this idea that people are trying to take money from him.
Well, I'll tell you what, it is, if you are interested in this campaign, and I was endlessly fascinated by why it was different than the previous two times. Usually when politicians run three campaigns of this level, you don't see them change. You don't see them evolve. The machinery and the people tend to be the same. This one was very different. If you want to know why, pick up the book, Revenge, the inside story of Trump's return to power by Alex Isenstadt. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us.
Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics brought to you by me, Justin Robert Young, written and hosted, edited by the great and powerful Will Saddleberg for Dog and Pony Show Audio. We're based out of Austin, Texas. You want to send me an email, it is theyoungamerican@gmail.com. You can support us with a one-time donation, paypal.me/payjury. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Cash App is PX3Cash. You can send me anything you'd like in the mail. Post Office Box 153184, Austin, Texas 78715. The only way that you can get bonus content from this show, 2 episodes a week, is at TakePoliticsSeriously.com. $3 a week, billed 12 monthly, or $99 for the entire year. That's 150 episodes of PX3 for under $100. That's less than $1 an episode. Jesus. That's a deal, baby. That's a deal. But our founding tier is the only place where you get your name read on the end of the podcast, like these fine folks in the Titanic founding tier. Goodly people like L3PO, Peepaw, Scott, Middle-Aged Mike, Tom, Sarah Jeannie, Jeremy, Pro Idiot, Chiller Tomatoes. Oh yeah, it's Adam. Neil, AB Puppy, Dr. Whiskey, Michael, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Will, the Borge B, Matthew, Matt, Andrew, Edwin, Sam, Andrew, Phil, Edison, Devon, Paul, a dog named Checkers, Gloria, Jerry, Trucker, John, Berkeley, Steven, and Zombie Doc. You want your name read on the show? There's only one place to do it. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. I'm going to go to sleep. Oh, have a good weekend. Hope everybody has a good weekend. We'll be back next week. I don't know what happens next week. I don't know if we have people booked. We have to book people for next week. But the week after that, our terrible state party draft is back. Scrimshaw, Jakubowski, they're back. We're going to do our terrible state party draft. And whew, there's some doozies out there. Some doozies. But that's in 2 weeks. Have a great spring weekend. Until next time, friends, this is your reminder that some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss. Three.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show audio.